Our next speakers have been mentioned a couple times already on stage this afternoon by previous speakers. They are from Kanabo Research. We have, and I'm going to try very hard not to butcher these names, Avihu, Tamir, and Dr. Pnina, Strauss-Levy. And they are going to talk about how to turn cannabis into a medical drug and what that looks like and provide some clarity around that. So, warm welcome, please. Or maybe not yet.
So we're going to talk about the process that we had in our experience, taking a product that is mainly a recreational product and taking it through a process of how can we take knowledge and know-how from the world of basically recreational cannabis or medical cannabis into the world of pharmaceutical. I see it everywhere. Okay. In general, high level of picture, cannabis products are being divided to three. We're talking about whole plant products, the single molecular products, and the synthetic one. If we're talking about the critical factor of how are we choosing a product that can actually become a medical product, we see a few key elements that we need to look in. Patient safety by far is the number one. So that means that all these products that have question marks on what are you adding inside, what are the additive, the material you're using for diluting the product that cannot pass any safety test are problematic materials. In addition, we're talking about a medical device. You need a device that can pass through medical device certificate, and that's another important thing. Consistency in dosing is something that is acceptable not to have in the world of recreational of cannabis. One of the best analogy that I can say, and I'm hearing a lot about cannabis, is that you can compare it basically to wine. It's fine in the west coast of the United States that it's like wine. You know that although you have the same strain, every time you harvest, every time you're getting the material, it's different. And it's fine in a world that you're basically working on recreational market and boutique market, but obviously something that is impossible in a world of purely medical. When we're taking our product into preclinical trials and clinical trials, I can't have that the product will change in the next harvest. Delivery method, bioavailability, this is things that you check when you're making a product medical. The bioavailability levels. I don't know if you guys know about the bioavailability of edibles, but it's very low. If you're consuming CBD in edibles, you see numbers that are not more than 10%. And that's, again, something that is very problematical in a world of medical. And production and standard, obviously there's clear standards and to produce the material in a frame of medical. One of the biggest challenges when we're looking on that is target market and territory. When you're looking on cannabis regulation, it changes in every different territory, every body. We know that the FDA is very strict. Currently, we don't have any cannabis products approved by the FDA. Other markets, question mark. We're not sure yet what will be the regulation. We know the pharma regulation. It seems like medical cannabis is not something that you're going to have a clear regulation on. In general, the market is split, putting aside recreational. It's supposed to be somewhere here if we had recreational. But pharmaceutical on one hand and medical cannabis on the other. And the thing that we were trying to figure out, what is the big difference between these two? How do you define the difference between pharmaceutical cannabis and medical cannabis? So first of all, pharmaceutical today is synthetic. Perhaps GW is going to change everything, and in the end of this year, we're going to see the first natural cannabis product, but currently only synthetic products. On the other hand, we see in the medical cannabis that the amount of products, the variety and the options you have as a patient is huge. Because of the low barrier to entry, because the regulation is not stiff as a pharmaceutical state. So this is really what's different in these two markets. And I know that in the United States, it's hard to define medical cannabis because it's the line between recreational and medical cannabis sometimes in some states are very, very blurry. In this side of the Atlantic, it's actually easier to define. You see very, very clear what is the more conservative medical cannabis program looks like. And you don't have recreational program in Europe, for example, or Israel, Australia. So again, it's very clear to see the different strategy on looking into medical cannabis.
Thank you. Okay, so hello again. I'll be discussing a bit about the clinical aspects of medical or pharmaceutical cannabis. One of the biggest unmet needs at the moment is an undisputable evidence that cannabis on all its forms is actually safe and efficacious. And the medical community, the financial bodies are still in some doubt for various reasons. And in order to limit that doubt, we need to do clinical trials, but not just clinical trials, we need to do appropriate clinical trials. Clinical trials that are done in accordance with the regulatory authorities, clinical trials that are done according with the clinical and regulatory standards that will be accepted either by the regulatory bodies or by the key opinion leaders or by both. So essentially these are very few aspects. One of the, each of these aspects is actually a conference in itself. So I'll be able really to just the tip of the iceberg just to give you a glance into this specific aspect, but these essentially are the aspects that are needed to be treated when you're performing clinical trials with cannabis treatments. Now it's either you want this drug to be registered and marketed as a pharmaceutical entity, or you just want to validate the treatment that it's safe and efficacious. No matter what, you need to do the clinical trial in a certain way. So I'm going backwards, sorry. So just an example about the choice of indication. Even before you do the clinical trial, you have considerations, various considerations on how you choose your indication. You have to consider the patient population that you're going to treat. Many companies have an idea and they say, well, this specific treatment can treat this and that population, epilepsy or chronic pain or whatever. But you have to remember that you eventually need to include this specific patient population in your clinical study. You will need to enroll this population. Is it a rare disease population? Can you find it easily in medical centers and excellence centers? Is it accessible? Is it an elderly population? Is it a population that is accessible in terms of arrival to the sites and so on? So you have to consider your population before you start your clinical development. Endpoints. When you do a clinical study, when you write your protocol, you define your objective and thereby your endpoints. What is your target? Now, you can choose your indication, you can choose your population, but then you have to define how you measure success. Now, it could be the most appealing indication with great market potential, but unfortunately, the means of the measure are very limited. Because of the specific type of this indication. It could be because the FDA has not found a valid measure that they accept, or that there is a measure but it's not giving a very conclusive result. So when you consider your indication, make sure that your endpoints, that the measure of means that you're going to apply in clinical development are actually valid, measurable, and usable. This is very important. Another issue is the unmet need of your specific indication. So again, you have a great idea, you have a potential use that you think you can apply it for, but is this specific indication serves an unmet need? Will it be then recognized by key opinion leaders, by the financial bodies, by insurers, by reimbursement bodies? will you be able to sell your product in the end of the day? So just choosing your indication, having a great idea, having a drug and doing a clinical study is not enough. You have to sell your product. We'll discuss this in a minute. So you have to make sure that you're serving an unmet need, something that is that will be recognized in the end of the day. Placebo development. So it sounds like it's something technical and trivial, but believe me, it's not. When you need to do a clinical study and eventually you need to go to a phase 3 study to have a conclusive evidence, you cannot get away from that, you need to have a blinded study. In order to have a blinded study, you have to use a placebo product. A placebo product must be appropriately masking your active product. And it's not easy because you have to assure that it has the same taste, smell, color, viscosity, and so on and so on. So it's as if you have another product to develop. So when you choose your indication, when you choose your product development, you have to consider what will be your placebo development because this may be the live or die of your eventual development. Okay, another aspect, and again, these are very, very few and limited aspects. I'm touching very few of them just to give you an example. A very important aspect is the safety aspect. We know that today we have enough information from recreational use and medical use. We have accumulated enough information in terms of safety that we can already identify specific populations that should be excluded from clinical trials, unless these are the populations that we are aiming for. For example, nursing mothers, pregnant women, pediatrics, adolescents, people that have mental disabilities or inclinations towards mental diseases. This is, again, just an example. Another issue is the adverse events. We already know more than 60 long and short-term adverse events that are associated with the use of medical cannabis. We need to apply these adverse events already in our development program, so eventually once we have our data, our own data, that we can exclude these adverse events and know that these are not related to the specific treatment that we are identifying. The issue of the P450 enzymes, I'm not going to get into the biochemistry, but eventually the CBD and THC have the capabilities to alter and modify the functionality of these enzymes in the liver. And if they do so, specific ingredients of other drugs that we are consuming may be decreasing or increasing. And this may potentially affect the additional disease that we are treating or specifically the medical cannabis treatment that we are giving. So special considerations should be given for that as well. Last but not least is the regulatory guidances. Even if you're not going to do this clinical study for pharma, you still need to consider regulatory guidances because doing a clinical study is something that has to be according to the local law and legal. So we have to pay attention, very close attention to the specific regulatory guidelines in the local country that you're performing the study. For example, a guidance that was recently issued by the EMA about first in human, first in use. Now, eventually, if you're developing a drug, and although it's a medical cannabis treatment and cannabis has been in use for more than, I don't know how much, years, decades, it still is, this is a new product and this is first in human. So you need to pay attention for these specific guidance and local law. A very important aspect is the pharmacoeconomics. And again, this has to be considered long before your application is approved and during clinical development. So your target is sales, not development. You want to sell your product and gain profit. And what we need to show during clinical development is what are the advantages of our development to the financial bodies. Why should they reimburse? Why should they pay patients for this treatment? And how this would help the economy. So these are examples on what could be the potential advantages. And again, this is something that we can do a conference just for the sake of reimbursement and financial issues. But for example, use of expensive drugs could be decreased potentially. Specific medical treatments could be saved or reduced. Hospitalization days is something that is very expensive, and this, again, number could be lowered. Additionally, in terms of the economy, the thriving economy and the medical cannabis sector will eventually contribute to the economy. Another example is the what happened in 2015 in Colorado. More than 18,000 workplaces and increase of $2.4 billion income to the state thanks to this thriving industry.
I will add here a bit, but stay. I wanted to pass to the questions as well. So this is what we did, basically. We took the vape pod that's a recreational product, was developed as a recreational product, but we were lucky enough that the factory that manufactured the vape pod is a GMP certified, ISO certified manufacturer. And then we thought to ourselves, okay, let's try to make it a medical device. Everyone said that's not going to be possible, definitely not for cannabis. But we said, in Israel, let's do some chutzpah and try. And basically, this is the process that you need to, obviously, this is the process that you need to do for medical validation for formulation. Definitely, if you want to take it all the way through for a botanical drug or a herbal medicine. So you need to do all the phases that you see here, the phase 1, 2, 3, and the full process of registration. As we mentioned, currently it's a challenge to do it for cannabis that are not synthetic or not single molecular, but theoretically there's still a process. In the medical device certificate, the process is a bit different. Here we just need to show, first of all, that this device is a medicinal device and is used. Then going over to the device classification and looking into PK study, showing that the bioavailability is something that is reasonable, as I mentioned before, and doing safety tests, showing that the device is a device that is safe to use. Each classification has a different safety use and registration that's needed. So that's another challenge that we had. Then obviously you need to find a regulator that is on board. That's a challenge in a lot of places. It didn't happen until now in the CE in Europe or in the FDA. But we found a regulator that was happy to find a solution or something to basically replace smoking of cannabis. And let's remember that still majority of patients are smoking cannabis as the delivery method, the #1 delivery method that they're using. So the Israeli regulator said this is a solution we want to see and we're going to support it, but please bring data and show us that it's actually safe and work. And now we're, after we got our approval, we're still going to go through clinical validation to show that the device, we passed the safety, but now we want to show the efficacy, the bioavailability, and that's where we are right now. We wanted to give you the to ask some questions. These are a few points that are truly our point of view. So it's not a fact. And a few things looking into the future, or what is medical cannabis? Where is medical cannabis going to go? So medical cannabis is like this gray area between a pharmaceutical cannabis and recreational. And if I'm looking on the first point, we see that recreational cannabis is actually replacing the medical cannabis. We saw programs in the United States where the country became recreational. The medical programs were stopped or frozen, and some canceled. And when you're speaking with more and more people from the industry, some have this notion that medical cannabis 5, 10 years from now will be obsolete. You will have in the market consumer products on one hand and pharma products. So it's something, open question. QA and safety, all the tests that are being done today is always local. Now Canada will come into a federal program, so perhaps we will see in recreational market some kind of standard on a federal level. In medical, when there will be a clear legislation on a federal level for medical product, what will it be? Herbal, botanical medicine, medicinal food, claimable cosmetics, nutraceutical was a claim that basically is a marketing claim right now, have no standards. So that's something that is very open. The pharmaceutical side, and I think here I can get a lot of help from you. Will the FDA approve the first cannabis-based drugs? That's a very open question. And I think personally that this is a unique time in history that when we will see a pharmaceutical drug from the FDA, we'll probably see on the same time a consumer product that in the molecular level as a product is absolutely the same. And think about that for a minute. You don't have it in any other pharma drug. So now as a patient, you will be able to choose if you're taking a pharmaceutical drug or buying from the dispensary. Let's take, for example, a pure CBD topical or a pure CBD tincture. How is that going to affect the market? Pnina, your thoughts on the FDA approving the first cannabis-based drug?
Well, it could happen. Challenging, but can happen. But eventually, I think that every drug, regardless of the substance that it is made of, has to go, if it is requiring marketing application approval, has to go the very challenging regulatory review process of the FDA or EMA or other competent authority. So it doesn't really matter what is the substance made from, even if it's herbal, whether it was in use as a recreational, it still will have to undergo the regulatory process, and regardless of the substance. So we'll see.
It's a matter of time until we're going to see.
It's a matter of time, yeah.
Any questions before we're wrapping up? Yeah.
Maybe I telling about the future a little bit, you know. I'm nobody, but I think the future is already here. You was right 10 times than you think you are right. The things that I cannot say about FDA thing, but and about things that other people spoke about, the tramp regulation, which they are much progressive that everybody think or dream. I think there's going to be a very big expectation for the next coming future. Hold your breath.
Thanks. We have time for a question. Another one?
Question. I'm curious a bit on the discussion of placebos. From my understanding, that's been a big challenge and kind of hurdle that the cannabis industry has struggled to get past in terms of being able to actually conduct the pharmaceutical level research that a lot of us would like to do. I know from my understanding, the double-blind studies that have been attempted with a placebo and cannabis weren't actually blind and kind of, I don't know if fell apart is the right term, but I was hoping you might address the particular challenges of placebos in cannabis, development of cannabis-based drugs.
Yeah. Well, indeed, it's a very big challenge because of the nature of the drug, and one can unblind himself because he can sense potentially the THC effect or other. So it's really difficult to blind a cannabis study. But in clinical studies, we all know, and the regulatory authorities know, that there isn't such a thing like 100% blinding, perfect blinding. So you have to do your best extent and develop the ultimate placebo that you can actually achieve, and go with that placebo to the FDA, send samples to the FDA, or EMA, again, I'm saying FDA, just an example, to a regulatory authority, and consult and get their nod on this. But there is one very big problem that they need to overcome, and that is the unblinding, and this is something that is still a challenge. But you can overcome this with very specific designs, clinical designs, and we can discuss this, for 3 hours or more. But if you apply a very specific design or a creative design during a clinical study, you can try to just, detour this potential unblinding that placebo patients may experience, or potentially the active patients may know. So yeah.
One more question. You had a question?
Your clinical trial, on what conditions you're going to try it? It's my first question, if I didn't heard it. Second, how many textures you're going to try to put in your machine in the next 2 or 3 years, do you think?
What was the last one? How many?
You're going to put one texture of oil in your vaping machine, or you're going to make 15? What is your, if you can say...
We call it formulation, not texture.
Formulation.
Okay. So first of all, we see it as a platform. My vision, my hope is that we'll have a device that in the end of the day will be approved as a medical device, even if the FDA, and will be open to others to be able to use it as a platform. So if someone did the research and have a specific formulation that is working on an illness that we're not involved in because we are limited on what we can do, they can use it as really an open platform for others. Specifically, we're looking in the near future for 3 type of indications. All of them are coming to replace very addictive drugs, and all of them need a fast onset, and in some cases self-dosing, meaning that the user know when he needs to basically consume his cannabis for relief. So the first one is insomnia, sleep disorder. The second one is neuropathic pain. And the third one is for PTSD, something that I think in Israel we're starting to have a lot of knowledge and experience with. Maybe in worldwide, Canada outside will be able to be treated as anxiety in general. Are we done, or we have time for one more? Okay. No? Okay. Thank you very much.